Okay, this set of slides is going to cover some of the basics of cartography. I'm not going to duplicate a lot of the conversations that we've had about data visualization because many of the same things apply to maps. We're going to talk about some things that are specific to maps and maybe just reinforce a couple of important things. So the art of representation. Think about cartography much in the same way as the other data viz conversations that we've had. We have to think about how to encode data on maps, but also how to choose what not to show. So we also want to be data dense. We want to remove chart junk and really just help focus the map to the purpose for our readers. But it's important to, obviously, we know this, but state out loud that maps can't be an exact depiction of reality because there's just too much complexity in the world. And so that introduces, how we generalize and simplify, which we talked about in another set of slides. So why do we care about map design? Because amateur maps undermine your ability to communicate your otherwise very important results. So it's worth it to take the time to make a good map because people are going to take the content of the map more seriously. We want to make it, of course, easy for our audiences to understand the message. And then here's sort of the list of stuff that we just need to knock out of the ballpark when we're making maps and plots. So size the map elements relative to their importance on the map and importance, to supporting the map's purpose. So size things according to their importance. Pay attention to empty spaces. You need to address the ultimate medium that you're going to be producing your map in. Think about audience. Does it need to be mapped? Just because it can be doesn't mean that it should be. And then we have to consider elements of interactivity. I'm going to talk about a few of these now. So well-designed maps have a very clear purpose, are designed for a specific medium, have a target audience, and are set up to be viewed at a specific viewing distance, or they can be interactive and scaled. But that comes from knowing your medium, audience, and purpose. And then we have to address color deliberately. Well-planned layouts balance the empty space, and I'll talk about that in a second. Deliberately line things up and have been, put out there for some feedback because other eyes can often see things that we can't. We're too close. Make sure you unify the map's purpose with the way you lay out the map. And you can use tricks from visual hierarchy, design elements, and the projection. And then finally, how are you going to be producing this? Will you be printing it, raster format, vector format, and then there are interactive web maps. So just to cover a couple of concepts and some definitions, a compartmentalized map is sort of the more institutional looking formal maps. Things are more rigid, rectilinear. Some of the benefits are it's easily standardized and you can kind of use the same format or template, but it does often suffer from kind of dialed in aesthetics and can create a real jumpy composition that forces your eye to jump around a lot more. This on the right is an example of a fluid layout, and it has its limitations as well. For example, I don't know that this makes the chart any easier to read by having the ocean, kind of organically cut through it, or the legend. But fluid compositions get rid of those sharp divisions. I think they have a slightly better aesthetic. Sometimes they allow for the main map to be a little bit bigger. You're not so constrained by the frames. So that's that. Visual hierarchy. This is how you organize your design in order to make certain elements more prominent than others. And the idea of having the visual hierarchy match the intellectual hierarchy is you have to know what the map's purpose is so that when you look at the map, the thing that your eye is drawn to first should be the most important thing on the page or in the map. A strong visual hierarchy is going to be organized in a way that resonates with how we read in this culture. Top to bottom, left to right tends to be kind of the prime real estate ranking. Using high contrast, page placement, sizes all help create a hierarchy on the page. A weak visual hierarchy, everything is treated the same, and it's really hard for your eye to know where to begin and how to travel through the layout. One tool you can use is something we talked about previously, figure ground. Figures are the things that should be standing out, and ground is the background, and sometimes it's pretty muddled. You can use color and contrast to help control and amplify the figure-ground relationship. Low contrast, it tends to get a little bit lost. Here's an example. The image on the right has a very poor figure-ground relationship. The low contrast makes it harder and just more challenging to pick out the important elements. Whereas on the left, the high contrast between the background and the map and the labels creates a stronger visual hierarchy. But high contrast can sometimes go too far. So sometimes the contrast is so high that the figure ground is still ambiguous. I mean, do you see Idaho or do you see kind of the old man looking down? Anyway, okay. So just so that we're all on the same page, the general rules of visual hierarchy. This is affected by size, color, value, the shading. It's important to know that big things are going to draw the eye more. Dark things on a light background are going to draw the eye more. And it's important to think about this both within your plots and then the way your plots or maps sit on the entire page. So we might start a competition between a big title and your main plot. Just make sure that when you do the squint test, which I'll show you in a second, that the most important things are the things your eye is drawn to first. North arrows. Big north arrows would be an example of not sizing things according to how important they are on the page. And then keep in mind when you're doing a choropleth map or you're doing a sequential color ramp that goes from light to dark, depending on what the base map is, one end of that spectrum is going to be higher contrast than the other. And so one end of your sequential color ramp is going to draw the eye more than the other. Make sure that you set that ramp so that you're drawing your audience's attention to the important end of the color scheme. Okay, negative space and balance. If you just take a look at these 4 examples, laying out the page with the same element, but just moving things around to different locations and sizing them a little bit, hopefully you can see if you squint by this one that this is really left heavy. It's organized logically where we've got our title in the upper left, so whether we're reading top to bottom, left to right, it kind of makes sense there. And it has kind of a nice organization. It's got the 1/3, 2/3 organization, but it is very left heavy, and there's a lot of empty space off to the right. Here we've got poor balance and white space. It's bottom heavy, and there's a big hole. And hopefully you can see that. All of these are completely solid layouts. The alignments are really good, but there isn't a lot of balance here. It's very crowded down at the bottom. This one I think works really well. It just needs a little bit more space between the elements so that your eye has a chance to breathe. It's those Gestalt principles of creating a little organization and groupings. We want to spread these out a little bit, and that's what this one does arguably the best. We've got nice margins so that it doesn't feel crowded. We've got ample space between the map and then the supporting elements, less space between the supporting elements. So we're giving the main map the most room to breathe, and then really nice tight alignments. Okay, and here's the super scientific way to assess your visual hierarchy, the squint test. Stand back from your screen, stand back and even let your eyes go blurry, and ask yourself what's drawing your attention. What thing on the page is the thing that you just can't not see? That should be the most important element on the page. So the super scientific squint test. And here's just an example of a really, in so many ways, bad map. We've got Things that are sized very evenly, even though one is the star of the show and one is a supporting element. Size things according to how important they are to the map's purpose. Pay attention to overlaps. Pay attention to deliberate alignments. Make sure your margins are consistent all the way around the page. We've talked about the rainbow color ramp. We've talked about legends and numeric values that should be rounded, how to classify, north arrows that are really unnecessary, underscores. I could go on for about 10 more minutes probably. So a lot of white space, balance, yeah, okay. Scale bars. Scale bars for navigational maps can be set up in a whole bunch of different ways that include a lot of detail. But for thematic maps, generally speaking, no scale bar. They're not needed. That's not the point. If you are going to include a scale bar, I recommend using them on maps only where scale is absolutely not intuitive, whether you've got a base map that doesn't include any labeled landmarks or something like that. But anytime the scale is intuitive, you can leave the scale bar off. If you're going to include one, I would recommend something this simple, just to give a very quick intuitive idea of scale. Legends, like I said, no jargon, no underscores, no abbreviations. Make sure you're paying attention to capitalization, and then your classification scheme should be clear, and then round, round, round. We don't need this kind of precision in a legend ever. And then labeling we can talk about, but this is more for navigational kind of maps. Okay, take home messages. The quality of the map will determine, to a large extent, the reception of your work. A poorly produced map suggests that the analyses were also poorly handled. So don't skimp on your cartography. The quality map suggests that the analyses were also done properly and with due care.